government of Britain have got to recognise the importance of British Leyland to the whole of the nation's economy, because if it goes down, the West Midlands will be an economic desert. And quite frankly, if you make an economic desert of the West Midlands, because it is the hub of our manufacturing industry, then the nation will go with it.
British Leyland falters, and TVI reveals the plight of 1 million workers in the supply industry if Leyland fails. The reporter, Mike Walsh.
A banquet for the French press, compliments of British Leyland. All to promote BL's latest offering, the Allegro 3. Not a new car, an old one with a facelift. An appropriate last throw for a company dying because it wouldn't invest. And BL is all too near its deathbed. 2,000 men in the Longbridge engine shop, thousands more throughout the company, are being laid off. Punitive cutbacks, forced on a company whose market's been swallowed by competitors who did invest. Even worse could follow after the workers voted no this week to BL's supposedly essential productivity package. It couldn't be more ominous for Chairman Sir Michael Edwards.
Unless we are successful in building our market share, there will be long-term unemployment, which will be very serious indeed. This particular current situation, first of all, it is nothing like 50,000 people, which was the figure quite irresponsibly used the other day and not confirmed by the company. It's nothing like that figure, and it is, of course, temporary.
Well, if it's 30,000 or whatever...
Less.
If it's less than 30,000, will those 30,000, can you promise them that they'll get their jobs back?
Certainly not. The fact is that if we go through a period of great doubt in the next weeks over the wage deal, if we do not put the wage deal to bed, if we do not get working practice changes agreed, then confidence in us will sink further, and I think you will find that we will have a market share problem. I'm saying that if we can get these matters resolved quickly, that the improvement in traffic in February should enable us to have a reasonable March, and that is what we're going for. If being healthy means slimming it down as we've done, so be it.
But isn't it true
It's survival that we're concerned with, Mr. Walsh.
But for the moment, anyway, BL is still Britain's biggest manufacturer and one of its top employers. Today, its workforce totals 160,000. But no one is secure. Even at Solihull, where Europe's car of the year, the Rover Saloon, is a sales disaster. Up to 10,000 men here are now to be laid off. When the crisis reaches this stage, crippling the best, the question's beginning to change from how the company can be saved to whether it can be saved. And what happens to other jobs and the rest of the British economy if our biggest manufacturing exporter goes to the wall?
We estimate that at least for every worker on the assembly track, you've got 5 or 6 workers outside making the bits and pieces that he puts together. And really, you know, when one looks at the effect that the closure of Leyland plants will have on little small manufacturers, then you've got to remember that when you take a Leyland order away from them, you make the whole of their business uneconomic, and that can result in a rippling effect which could cause more and more closures.
If Leyland goes, so too will other car manufacturers based in this country, Ford, Vauxhall and Chrysler. And with that, we'll see the loss of jobs, not just for car assemblers, but for the suppliers of the components to the cars.
How many in Britain, all told, will go?
I believe that if the car business, the car industry in this country were to collapse on the basis, as I say, of Ford and others leaving the country, you could have a loss of 2-3 million jobs.
Job losses are impossible to predict precisely, but at stake outside Leyland is an interlocking network of firms, thousands, who account for over a quarter of Britain's national product. For example, take the making of a lock. One Leyland worker installs it, but the lock is assembled outside. First, the big firms. The backing or base plate is made by the British Steel Corporation. Plastic moulding material comes from the DuPont Group. And the washer from the giant GKN group of companies. Big firms who can at least diversify or set up abroad, like Wilmot Breeden, which puts the lock together. But Leyland's problems have still hit Wilmot's and its Birmingham lock assemblers just as hard. For them, every drop in BL sales means fewer locks to make. Fewer locks, fewer jobs. 6 years ago, when BL's share of the British market was 30%, Wilmot's employed over 5,000 people. Today, when BL's market share has been cut to 15%, Wilmot's workforce has been cut in half as well.
We've had to close down factories, put factories up for sale. We've meant a rundown of people. It has caused problems within the factory, and you couldn't get much more serious than that.
Might you have to cut it again in half?
That is possible. That is possible.
What degree of unemployment can you foresee in those circumstances?
I would be unfair to speculate. Many companies, of course, as one is reading, are trying to win business overseas. But unhappily, our record of disputes, which I think gives the wrong impression of this country, makes it doubly difficult for us to win business overseas. But it would be very serious indeed for the West Midlands. And that is why we cannot even contemplate the failure of British Leyland. It must succeed, and we must do everything to ensure it does.
Wilmot's workers know what's at stake, like Margaret Chamberlain.
We all depend on Leyland, but if anything happens to Leyland, this would be a ghost town because everyone depends on them. Also the shops, and includes my friends, neighbours, relations, are all involved in the motor industry. And without them, we're nothing. As far as I'm concerned, you know, if they do contract, I'd have to find another job, I think. If I could find another job, that is. At our ages, you know, it's very difficult. After 40, a woman's old. Anyway, in a factory's concerned. But even my husband, at 50, he's too old for a job. So where I'd go, I don't know. It just depends on, say, Leyland.
Husband Len is even more vulnerable. He works direct for Leyland on the Rover finishing line. He can only hope for a miracle.
We're having a bad spot at the moment, but it'll do a full circle like it has done before, like everything else does. They keep telling us they're not selling this and they're not selling that. But in the end, they'll be demanding everything they can get eventually, I hope.
Son Ian works for Dunlop, another BL supplier, so the whole Chamberlain family will feel the pinch.
It would be rough to have to be out of work and be on the dole, because we live to a certain standard which we've become accustomed. And it would come hard, but I wouldn't be frightened of it. No way. There are other jobs. So they tell me. Everybody says, oh, you'll get a job, because we all had a chance of being redundant recently. And being as I'm 50 years old, I decided I'd stay at the Rover and take my chances there. Other men who've taken the chance are now still out of work, having spent nearly all their redundancy pay, and are getting desperate.
I mean, we've got a nice little car and we've got a comfortable home, but without a job, it's got to go, hasn't it? Yes, it's frightening, really. Thought of it.
The wolf's been and gone, and one who moves about in Europe, you will see them enjoying a standard of living beyond their wildest expectations. And our competitors, their bellies are full, but they're not satisfied, and they'll be back. So what we're talking about is survival, and we all better understand it.
To make the lock, Wilmot's need smaller firms. The barrel of the lock and the keys are made by Linwood Engineering, one of 4,000 medium-sized firms who supply Leyland suppliers. 5 years ago, it might not have mattered so much to Linwood Engineering or its 100 workers had Leyland disappeared. Round Birmingham, work was easy to find, for firms and people. Unemployment was half the national average. Putting a dozen parts together for a lock barrel was one of many options. Not today. The jobless rate in the West Midlands has doubled. So what would a Leyland collapse mean here, to a firm which has no hope of diversifying? Linwood's directors have no doubt.
We'd have to lay people off. The whole structure of the company is built around the locking device. The company would have to close. There'd be no other option available to us.
It would have a domino effect if Leyland were to close down, and it would be absolutely disastrous in an area like this for future employment prospects.
How bad would unemployment be in this area?
I would imagine as bad as anything that could be compared in the so-called distressed areas of the country, such as the North East or South Wales.
And do you think this is likely?
I do think it is absolutely likely. I think it's a distinct probability.
A forecast which explains why firms like Linwood have watched every act in the Leyland saga. The smaller the firm, the more vulnerable. The keyhole is made by Vanguard Presswork, one of the smaller but vital suppliers with under 100 workers. Vanguard is in Pershore, where West Midlands economic problems have pushed the jobless rate up from 6 to 10%. Jane and Brian Cunningham have put all their money and most of their time into the firm.
I go around every morning because it's easier to answer the phone and help Brian out sort of with problems. You know, I mean, if I've got the time or free time to go around, then I go around and help as much as I can. Should we be, you know, short-staffed at any time, or they're particularly busy on a job, then I will go in the factory and help out on the presses.
We ought to get together to discuss. Can we fix up a meeting?
Their 20 keyhole punchers are totally dependent on BL. Other suppliers are desperate to find more stable customers than Leyland. But this firm has decided to take the gamble. Nobody has given Sir Michael Edwards a bigger vote of confidence than Brian Cunningham.
The investment programme we've embarked on this year is directed towards BL cars. We've committed ourselves totally. If BL were to collapse, then we stand a very good chance of going with them. Certainly would cut our operation by 50% and probably put us back 1 to 2 years.
Do you feel confident that you will avoid that?
Yes, with the coming of Michael Edwards, that is what's prompted us to go on this expansion programme. We feel that he's the man that can put the company straight, and we're prepared to invest to support that.
And if you're wrong, what will that mean to you personally?
Financial disaster. To support this, the outlay for this machinery comes by putting our houses up against it, to cover the bank loans, etc.
So you go bankrupt?
Yes.
Crumbs. I've got to stop him. Matthew.
It's fair to say that no family will suffer more if Leyland goes.
I go? Yes. 3, 1, 2. Oh, who's yellow?
No, I'm good. Go on.
You've taken a big risk. You've invested quite a lot, and you've put your house up to the bank to raise the money. Aren't you worried about that?
Yes, I am. It was a big decision to make, but it's just one of those things that if you're going to help, you've just got to sort of throw everything in and just hope that everything will sort of turn out for the best. I mean, if it does, then obviously, you know, I'm going to be very happy we've done it.
And even the Cunningham family isn't the final link in the chain stretching all the way down from Leyland. Right at the bottom of the Leyland lock chain is the tiny engineering firm in Leominster which makes the tools for the Cunninghams. It's off the beaten track, but without team tools, the Cunninghams couldn't punch out keyholes to send to Linwood, who then couldn't supply Wilmots, and BL wouldn't have its locks.
Shall I make this 282?
Yes.
Norman Powell has been here for 3 years. There's just enough work to keep himself and 2 other highly skilled men in jobs, providing he can maintain his present turnover of £35,000 a year. So how would a Leyland collapse leave him?
It would seriously affect my future.
And would it affect the future of the employees here?
Oh, most definitely, yes, yes.
And that's a threat not only for all those in the lock chain, not only for Leyland's own 160,000 workers. Add all the other car components, all the other industries directly and indirectly involved, and there's over 1.5 million jobs which now hang on Leyland getting it right.
Under here is the car that can make or break BL, the Mini Metro. The Metro's at the heart of the Edwards plan. It's the first in the line of new models that Leyland's counting on to outsell the Volkswagens, the Fiats, and all those other foreign success stories. The wraps come off this car next autumn. If it's a winner, then Leyland cars will survive. But if it's a flop, then Leyland has had it. They can't afford another failure.
The Metro is on programme. The Metro has been audited against competitors. We're satisfied that it is a competitive vehicle. It is, as I said to you earlier, it is a cheeky car. It is going to have appeal. It will be on time. We will have stock to sell. And it is going to be, it is in fact the whole object of all our efforts at the present time. We've got to get to Metro, and October cannot come quickly enough from my point of view or my colleagues' point of view.
Will it really start rolling along here by Easter? Will they ever produce enough to make a profit? But Leyland's hopes, like Leyland's signature tune, are buoyant. The trouble is that other car makers use robots to make cars. BLs are still just practicing. Practice is one thing, making cars another, when unions and management can't agree who pushes the buttons. If the Metro fails, it's the scrapyard for Sir Michael's plans, which depend on Metro profits to get them off the ground. The government won't come up with any more money, so the Metro has to compare with the best. Car companies employ specialists like John Reynolds to make their own comparisons. RBL's new cars as good as their old winners.
I'd love to think they are, but I'm not convinced. The foundation of success of those old models, it seems to me, was that they were innovatory, that they offered the public something that it hadn't been offered before. And what Leyland now seems to be aiming at is to offer the public what it's already being offered by somebody else. I don't think that's the way to ensure success for the future.
He now tests cars for a motoring magazine, but until last year he took other makers' cars to pieces for British Leyland.
And what we tried to find was ways in which a competitor, Volkswagen say, had designed their product that was more cost-effective than the design that BL had, and at the same time better.
You were kind of like an industrial spy.
Yeah, sort of, yeah. Yes, some people thought it was unethical what we did, but I don't. I think it's, in any sort of industry, that you've got to allow it.
Would you copy other models, other
Sure,
components?
yeah. I mean, provided there was no problem of patents or anything of that sort. Yes, as I left BL, there were plans to copy much of this car. It's the competitors who now show the way. The Fiesta, the Volkswagen Polo, the smaller sister to this Golf. These are the cars that are now showing the way that the car of today needs to be designed. But who knows about the car of tomorrow?
But you don't think the car of tomorrow is going to be the Metro?
No.
The cars of tomorrow are being developed by firms like Volkswagen, a company which only 6 years ago was itself deep in a Leyland-style crisis. Like Leyland, VW sales were plummeting because their cars were outdated. But at least they'd always invested. £300 million a year when Leyland was managing about 70 million. And that counted. It produced a new, successful model range. Sales leapt everywhere. In Germany, VW has close to 50% of the market. Abroad, well, 5 years ago, VW sold 53,000 cars in Britain. Last year, 82,000. And still they're lining up to wipe out even more of BL's market.
Sir Michael, can you get the kind of investment needed to recover? like VW did?
Well, the government have agreed to give us what we need. The amount of government help that we will have had by the end of this year is about equivalent to the net asset value of the company. So I dispute the argument about subsidies, but we will have enough money to do the essential model programs, provided we run the company efficiently. Now, one reason for the layoffs, of course, is that if we were to invest in inventories at 17% interest cost, we would not have the money for investment. So it's all a question of discipline. I'm asking the British public to discipline themselves about buying British. In the same way, our management and our workforce must be disciplined in not squandering money on excessive inventories and on low productivity. We need to use this money for investment to secure future jobs.
But isn't the money you're getting from government peanuts compared to what other companies are investing? They've got 3 or 4 times the amount of money that you have.
Yeah, and they're 3 and 4 times our size. We have got to fight for market share. We've got to fight to persuade people to support the British product while we win through to Metro. We've got to get ourselves efficient. We've got to get ourselves into the 1980s in terms of work practices and attitudes. And that goes for management as well as workforce.
I think that the viability of Leyland is necessary for the well-being of the nation.
Is there any real hope for Leyland?
Well, if there isn't any hope for Leyland, I believe we'll all have to scratch our heads, because I don't know what alternatives there are available to the nation if we stop making motor cars.
The problems of British Leyland were dramatically underlined when TVI tested how long it took to fit a lock in a Mini. And in a Volkswagen. The German starts at the same time. A demonstration which shows that the Germans have worked out how to do it better, more simply, more efficiently. The German has finished. The Englishman still has over a minute to go before the lock is finally installed. Tomorrow, his union meets management in the latest attempt to get somewhere on productivity. It'll be their 14th meeting in 3 months. Nobody expects any progress.